Have you ever woken up in a world where everything you once knew, everything you once loved, was completely wiped away? That's what Celera faces every day. The planet that used to be her home, a vibrant, thriving world filled with life, has now become a desolate wasteland. Her people, once proud and peaceful, are gone, leaving Celera as the last of her kind. She stands alone, looking out over a landscape that no longer resembles the place she once knew. The air is thick with the smell of decay, the ground scorched and broken, and the once lush forests reduced to ash and twisted remains. Celera's violet skin shimmers faintly in the fading light of the sun, her iridescent eyes scanning the horizon for any signs of movement. Every shadow could hide danger. The creatures that now roam her planet, mutated and monstrous, are always hunting. They aren't the only threat. The invaders who caused this destruction still hover above, scavenging the remnants of her world for its resources. They were the ones who unleashed the disaster, ripping her civilization apart in their insatiable greed. If they find her, they'll either kill her or force her to help them strip the last of what her planet has left. Her stomach tightens, not just from hunger, but from the deep, gnawing fear of being hunted. She hasn't eaten in days, but finding food is a challenge when everything around her seems to be dying. Still, she moves cautiously through the ruins of what was once her city, her steps light, her senses alert. The memories of her people haunt her, filling her mind with visions of what once was, a city alive with laughter, knowledge, and unity. Now it's just her, a survivor left to wander through the broken remnants of a world that was taken from her. As she picks her way through the rubble, she catches sight of something that might be useful, a patch of edible plants growing in the shadow of a fallen building. Carefully, she makes her way toward them, kneeling to harvest what little she can. But before she can gather enough, a low growl echoes through the empty streets. She freezes. Her heart races, her muscles tense. She knows that sound. It's one of them, the mutated creatures that have made this broken world their hunting ground. The growl grows louder, closer. Celera slips into the shadows, her movements swift and silent. Her breath is shallow as she presses herself against the crumbling wall, praying the creature won't find her. She watches as it prowls through the ruins, its massive, twisted form barely recognizable as something that once might have been a native animal. Now it's a grotesque mockery of life, driven only by hunger and instinct. For a moment, Celera is sure it will pass her by. But then it stops, its head turning toward her hiding spot, its nostrils flaring. She can feel its eyes, black and lifeless, scanning the darkness. She tightens her grip on the small, makeshift weapon she carries, knowing it won't be enough if the creature decides to attack. Just as it takes a step toward her, something distracts it, a noise from another part of the ruins. The creature snarls, turning away, and lumbers off into the shadows. Celera exhales slowly, her body trembling with the adrenaline. She waits a few moments longer, listening to the distant sounds of the creature moving away, before she dares to move again. She slips out of her hiding place, and quickly gathers what little food she can before retreating deeper into the ruins. Her mind drifts back to the last time she saw her people alive. It had been a day like any other, bright and full of promise. The sky had been clear, the air fresh with the scent of the sea. But everything changed in an instant. Without warning, the invaders arrived, their ships blotting out the sun, their weapons tearing through the peaceful cities. The sky had turned to fire, the ground shaking with the force of their attacks. Celera had been one of the lucky ones, or perhaps, she thinks now, one of the cursed. She had survived the initial onslaught, only to witness her people being slaughtered, her world torn apart. She had watched helplessly as the invaders unleashed a cataclysmic weapon, a device that turned the planet's rich ecosystems into a twisted, toxic wasteland. The creatures came after, born from the same mutation that had corrupted everything they touched. Her people had no warning, no chance to fight back. And now Celera is all that's left. She wonders sometimes why she survived. Was there a reason for her to be spared when so many others were not? Or was she simply unlucky enough to witness the end of everything she had ever known? The loneliness presses down on her as heavily as the ruins around her. She has spent months scavenging, hiding, and avoiding both the creatures and the invaders who still patrol the skies above. She moves silently through the shadows, using every ounce of her training as a scientist to outthink her enemies. But surviving in this world has taken a toll on her. The constant fear, the endless struggle, it's enough to drive anyone to despair. As the sun begins to set, casting long shadows across the broken city, Celera finds a place to rest for the night. She curls up in the hollow of a collapsed building, pulling her thin, tattered cloak tightly around her. Her stomach growls again, but the small amount of food she gathered today will have to last. She chews slowly, savoring each bite, even though the taste of the plants is bitter and unpleasant. The memories of her people flood her mind again as she sits in the darkness. The laughter of children, the gentle hum of conversation in the great halls where her people once gathered to share knowledge and celebrate life. She can almost hear the echoes of their songs, the joy that once filled these streets. But those sounds are gone now, replaced by the howling wind and the distant cries of the monsters that now roam free. Celera closes her eyes, trying to block out the overwhelming sense of loss. She knows she can't dwell on the past, not if she wants to survive. But sometimes, the weight of it all is too much to bear. She's tired of running, tired of hiding, tired of being alone. Her people are gone, and the world she once loved is unrecognizable. Is there any point in continuing? But as the night deepens, Celera's resolve hardens once again. She may be the last of her kind, but she's still alive. And as long as she's alive, she won't give up. She will keep fighting, keep surviving, and perhaps, just perhaps, find a way to honor the memory of her people in the process. Celera's world had been a wasteland for as long as she could remember, and she had learned to survive alone, always hiding, always cautious. But everything changed the day the new arrivals touched down on her planet. Unlike the raiders who came before, tearing her world apart for resources, this group was different. Their sleek, advanced ships descended from the sky without the violent disruption she'd come to expect. The insignia on their vessels bore a symbol she didn't recognize, but they moved with a kind of calculated precision that unsettled her. These humans weren't here for the same reasons as the others, or so it seemed. From her hidden vantage point, Celera watched as they emerged from their ship, carefully setting up equipment and surveying the surrounding area. There was no immediate aggression, no frantic pillaging. They seemed to be here with a purpose beyond destruction, which made them even more dangerous in her eyes. She had seen how those who came with curiosity could quickly turn to exploitation once they found something they deemed valuable. At the center of the human team was a man who stood out from the rest. Captain Marcus Hale, as she overheard the others call him, moved with an air of authority but not arrogance. His dark hair, cut close, and sharp eyes scanned the landscape with a mixture of caution and curiosity. He didn't bark orders. Instead, he spoke to his team with calm precision, clearly respected but also willing to listen. Something about him struck Celera as different from the raiders she had seen before, yet that didn't ease her fear. The last time humans had arrived, they brought nothing but devastation. Could these be any different? Celera's heart pounded as she considered her next move. She could continue to hide, waiting for these humans to leave as others had. But what if they found something that could further damage her world? What if they were here to finish what the raiders had started? Worse, what if they found her? The thought sent a shiver down her spine. She was the last of her kind, and if they discovered her, there was no telling what they might do. They had the technology to help, certainly, but they also had the power to destroy what little remained. Her mind raced as she tried to decide whether to confront them or remain a ghost in the ruins. She stayed hidden, watching as the humans moved deeper into the devastated landscape. They appeared to be collecting data, setting up sensors and scanning the ground with their advanced devices. They spoke in low voices, and although she couldn't understand their language completely, she caught enough to know that they were here to study the effects of the catastrophe, perhaps even to find out what caused it. That fact alone sent a surge of anxiety through her. If they discovered the truth, that their own kind were responsible for the destruction of her world, what would they do? Would they help, or would they simply take what they needed and leave her planet to die? Her dilemma deepened as she followed them through the ruins, always staying just out of sight. She watched Captain Hale closely, trying to read his intentions. He seemed different from the raiders, but she couldn't shake the fear that trusting him could lead to her downfall. She had seen too much, lost too much to believe that anyone from outside her world could be truly altruistic. But if they could help restore her planet, even just a little, was it worth the risk? Her decision was made for her when one of the mutated creatures, a towering, twisted beast with razor-sharp claws, emerged from the shadows, attacking one of the human researchers. The man screamed, caught off guard, as the creature lunged at him. Solara's instinct kicked in before she could stop herself. She had survived by understanding these creatures, knowing their weaknesses and how to avoid them. Without thinking, she stepped out from her hiding place, moving swiftly toward the beast. With a sharp, precise motion, she distracted the creature, using a sound she knew would disorient it. As it turned toward her, she struck with the weapon she had crafted from the remnants of her destroyed world. The beast snarled in pain before collapsing, and for a brief moment, there was silence. Solara stood over the creature, breathing heavily, and when she looked up, the humans were staring at her in shock. She realized, too late, that her actions had revealed her presence. There was no going back now. The humans had seen her. Captain Hale was the first to react, stepping forward with cautious curiosity rather than aggression. He held up a hand, signaling to his team to stand down. They were clearly wary, but his calm demeanor kept the situation from escalating. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice steady but laced with wonder. Solara said nothing at first, unsure of how to respond. Her heart raced with the fear of betrayal, but she couldn't turn back now. Slowly, she lowered her weapon, her eyes never leaving his. The tension in the air was thick, both sides unsure of the other's intentions. Hale's team kept their distance, clearly on edge, but it was Hale's gaze that intrigued her the most. He didn't look at her like she was a threat. Instead, there was a spark of something else, interest, perhaps even respect. "I am the last of my kind," she finally said, her voice steady despite the fear swirling inside her. "My people are gone, destroyed by those who came before you." Hale's expression softened, though the wariness remained. "We're not here to harm you," he said. "We're researchers. We came to understand what happened here, to learn." Solara's eyes narrowed. She had heard promises like that before, empty words that led to nothing but ruin. "And if you learn that your kind caused this?" she asked, her voice hardening. "Will you still promise no harm?" Hale's team exchanged uneasy glances, but Hale himself remained calm. "We came to help," he repeated, though Solara could hear the uncertainty in his voice. He wasn't entirely sure of what they would find, but his sincerity was enough to make her pause. The humans were suspicious of her, of course. They had every reason to be. But as the moments passed, Solara could see that Hale was different. He wasn't like the raiders. He was curious, yes, but not greedy. His team, however, wasn't so sure. They whispered among themselves, clearly debating whether they could trust her, and Solara could feel their eyes on her, filled with suspicion. Still, something in her wanted to believe that this human, at least, could be different. Maybe, just maybe, she could trust him enough to see if they could help her world. But the fear of betrayal weighed heavily on her heart. Every instinct told her to run, to hide, to continue surviving alone. Yet, after months of isolation, the idea of working with someone, even a human, was almost overwhelming. Hale could sense her hesitation, and though he didn't push her, he made it clear that their intentions were genuine. "We're here to study, to understand what happened," he said again, his voice steady. "But if there's something we can do to help, we will." Solara wanted to believe him. But trust wasn't something that came easily to her anymore. She had lost too much, and the memory of her people's destruction was still fresh in her mind. But as she looked at Hale, saw the compassion in his eyes, a small part of her wondered if maybe, just maybe, she wasn't alone in this fight. As the days passed, the humans settled into their research, setting up equipment across the wasteland. Solara watched them closely, her suspicion growing. Though they weren't the violent raiders who had ripped her world apart, she could sense that their motives were not entirely pure. The conversations she overheard between Marcus and his team painted a troubling picture. Earth, they said, was in the midst of its own ecological crisis. Resources were dwindling, ecosystems collapsing. Solara's planet, with its unique energy source buried deep beneath the surface, could be the solution to reversing the damage on their home world. For all their careful words, Solara knew what that meant. The same hunger that had destroyed her world could now threaten it again, this time, under the guise of help. The humans might not be here to raid and pillage, but they were here to extract something vital from her planet, something they desperately needed. They spoke of finding a way to harness the planet's energy, but Solara couldn't help but wonder, once they took what they needed, would they simply leave her world to wither away? She kept her distance, torn between the potential help these humans could offer and the fear that they would drain the last life from her planet. Marcus was different, yes, but could she trust him enough to believe that they wouldn't repeat the same mistakes that the raiders had made? Her uncertainty was soon overshadowed by a more immediate threat. The creatures that had plagued her world since the catastrophe had become more aggressive. They attacked the humans' camps with increasing frequency, their monstrous forms seeming to grow more vicious with each encounter. But something about the creatures' behavior was odd. They didn't appear to be hunting for food or acting out of survival. Instead, they moved with a purpose, as though they were being driven by something darker. That's when Solara learned the truth. Hidden deep within the wreckage of the planet's core was an alien warlord, the true mastermind behind the invasion. He sought to control the energy that her world held, bending it to his own dark purposes. The mutated creatures were not random beasts. They were his soldiers, twisted by the same forces that had ravaged her planet. The warlord's plan was far more dangerous than anything Solara had imagined. He wasn't just after her world. He intended to use its energy to conquer others, leaving a trail of destruction in his wake. Both Solara and the humans were obstacles in his path. When Marcus and his team stumbled upon the warlord's lair, the reality of their situation became clear. They couldn't defeat this threat alone, and neither could Solara. For all her skill and knowledge of the planet, she was only one person. And though the humans had advanced technology, they lacked the understanding of the planet's secrets, the ancient technologies hidden deep within the ruins, that only she knew how to access. Their survival, perhaps the survival of both their worlds, depended on them working together. It wasn't an easy decision. Solara had spent months avoiding humans, fearing what they could do. But Marcus was different. She had seen the way he operated, the respect he showed for the world around him. Unlike the raiders, Marcus wasn't here to strip the planet bare. He wanted to help, not just for his own world's sake, but for hers too. Reluctantly, she approached him, her heart heavy with the weight of her decision. "We need to work together," she told him, her voice steady despite the fear that still lingered. "There's more at stake here than just my world or yours. There are things buried beneath this planet, things only I can access. But if we don't stop this warlord, he will destroy everything." Marcus didn't hesitate. "Then we'll work together," he said. "Whatever it takes." And so, an unlikely alliance was forged. Together they began to map out a plan, combining Marcus's technological expertise with Solara's intimate knowledge of the planet's secrets. It wasn't easy. The warlord's forces were relentless, and the mutated creatures grew more dangerous with each passing day. But Solara had spent months honing her skills, learning how to fight and survive in this hostile world. She led the humans through the treacherous landscape, using her knowledge of the terrain and the creatures' weaknesses to give them an advantage in the battles that followed. Marcus, for his part, proved to be a capable and strategic leader. He respected Solara's guidance, and quickly adapted to the challenges they faced. As they fought side by side, a mutual respect began to form between them. Despite their differences, alien and human, scientist and soldier, they shared the same goal: to save what could be saved. Each skirmish against the warlord's forces strengthened their bond. Solara had never worked with anyone since the destruction of her people, and she found herself slowly letting down her guard around Marcus. He wasn't like the others. He wasn't here to exploit or destroy. He genuinely wanted to help, not just his own world, but hers too. In moments of calm, when the battles subsided, they talked. Celera shared stories of her lost civilization, tales of how her people had lived in harmony with the planet, nurturing it rather than exploiting it. She spoke of the bioluminescent gardens where children once played, the grand halls where knowledge was shared, and the deep, almost spiritual connection her people had with the world around them. It wasn't just their home, it was a living part of them, and they of it. Marcus listened intently, fascinated by the richness of her world's history. He, in turn, shared the story of Earth, of how humanity had once lived in balance with nature but had gradually shifted toward consumption and exploitation. The Earth was now paying the price, struggling to maintain its delicate ecosystems as they collapsed under the weight of human progress. That was why his team had come here, to find something, anything, that could help reverse the damage. Celera found herself softening toward Marcus. Perhaps, she thought, not all humans were like the raiders who had destroyed her world. There was a depth to Marcus, a compassion that she hadn't expected. As they continued to fight together, she began to see him not as an outsider, but as a partner in this struggle. Their shared experiences, their battles, and their stories created a bond that grew stronger with each passing day. But the threat of the warlords still loomed, and as they prepared for the final confrontation, Celera knew that their alliance would be tested like never before. The warlords' forces were gathering strength, and the battles ahead would be fiercer than anything they had faced so far. But for the first time since the catastrophe, Celera felt a glimmer of hope. She wasn't alone in this fight anymore. With Marcus by her side, she had a chance, not just to save her world, but to build something new from the ashes of what had been lost. The war was far from over, but the path ahead, though fraught with danger, was one that they would walk together. In the face of overwhelming odds, they had found strength in each other, and with that strength, they would face whatever came next. The battle came swiftly, like a storm unleashed from the darkest corners of the galaxy. The alien warlord had been waiting for his moment, and now he was ready to strike. His forces descended on the planet with terrifying speed, overwhelming what was left of the human expedition. The mutated creatures, his soldiers, charged through the ruins, tearing apart anything in their path. The air was filled with the sound of destruction, the heavy thud of weapons, and the cries of soldiers fighting to stay alive. Celera stood at Marcus's side, her weapon gripped tightly in her hand. They were outnumbered, and she knew it. The warlords' forces were far greater than anything they had faced before. But there was no turning back now. The bioengineering facility, hidden deep within the planet's core, was their only hope. If they could reach it, they could activate the ancient technology her people had once used to maintain balance and harmony. It was the planet's last chance for survival, and perhaps humanity's as well. She moved quickly, leading Marcus and his team through the crumbling remains of her world. The warlords' forces pressed in on all sides, but Celera knew the planet better than anyone. She guided them through narrow passageways, secret tunnels, and hidden routes, all the while hearing the distant explosions and feeling the ground shake beneath her feet. The invaders were relentless, but Celera's determination burned brighter. She couldn't let her world fall, not again. Not after all the sacrifice. When they reached the bioengineering facility, it was clear that the battle was far from over. The warlord himself had arrived, a monstrous figure towering over the battlefield. His eyes gleamed with cruel intent as he watched Celera and the humans approach the entrance to the facility. He knew what they were after, and he was determined to stop them. The fighting intensified. Celera and Marcus fought side by side, their movements in perfect sync as they battled the warlord's soldiers. Celera's combat skills, honed from months of surviving in this harsh, post-cataclysmic world, were sharper than ever. She moved with precision, striking down enemy after enemy, while Marcus used his military training to protect his team. But no matter how many they defeated, more kept coming. The warlord advanced, his presence an overwhelming force of destruction. He was after the same energy that the humans had sought, but for far darker purposes. He intended to use the planet's energy source to conquer worlds, to spread chaos and ruin wherever he went. If they didn't stop him now, everything, both Solara's world and Marcus's, would be lost. Inside the bioengineering facility, the ancient technology hummed faintly, long dormant but still functional. It was the key to restoring the planet, to bringing life back to the decayed land. But activating it required more than just a push of a button. The technology was deeply tied to the planet itself, and only someone with Solara's connection to the world could unlock its full potential. As the warlord closed in, Solara realized what she had to do. There was no other way. The technology required a sacrifice, a bond that only she could create. She would need to merge with the planet, to become one with its energy, to restore the balance that had been lost. But in doing so, she would lose herself. Her physical form would cease to exist, her consciousness forever entwined with the planet's essence. She turned to Marcus, her decision made. "I have to do this," she said, her voice calm despite the chaos surrounding them. Marcus's eyes widened in realization. "No," he said, shaking his head. "There has to be another way. We'll find it." "There isn't," Solara replied softly. "This planet, my people, they're a part of me. I have to be the one to restore it. You've helped me get this far, but this is something only I can do." Marcus's face hardened, his emotions raw as he struggled to find the words. But he knew deep down that she was right. He had come to respect her more than he could have ever imagined. And now, the thought of losing her hit him harder than any battle ever could. "Thank you," she whispered, her gaze meeting his. "For everything." Before he could respond, she moved toward the core of the facility. The ancient technology glowed faintly, responding to her presence. Solara closed her eyes, reaching out with her mind, her spirit, connecting with the planet she had loved for so long. In that moment, she felt everything, the pain, the loss, but also the potential for healing. The planet wasn't dead. Not yet. As the warlord's forces charged toward them, Solara activated the technology. A surge of energy rippled through the facility, spreading outward across the planet. The warlord let out a roar of rage, realizing too late what was happening. A brilliant light erupted from the ground, forming a shield around the planet, driving back the invaders. The mutated creatures faltered, disoriented by the sudden change in the planet's energy. The warlord, caught in the blast of pure energy, was forced to retreat, his plans shattered. But Solara didn't stop. The planet needed more than just protection, it needed to heal. She poured herself into the core, her consciousness merging with the planet's life force. Slowly, the devastation began to reverse. Where there had been scorched earth, small patches of green began to appear. The air grew cleaner, the toxic clouds dissipating. The planet was coming back to life. Marcus stood in awe, watching as the world around him began to transform. But his heart was heavy, knowing what it had cost. Solara's body was gone, but her presence remained. He could feel her in the wind, in the ground beneath his feet. She had become one with her world, forever a part of its regeneration. In the aftermath of the battle, the surviving humans gathered, their expressions a mix of relief and sorrow. The warlord had been defeated, the planet saved. But Solara's sacrifice weighed heavily on them all. As they prepared to leave the planet, Marcus took one last look at the rejuvenating landscape. He promised himself that he would never let humanity forget what had happened here, Solara's courage, her sacrifice. She had shown him what it truly meant to protect and preserve a world, not just for the sake of survival, but for the sake of the planet itself. When Marcus returned to Earth, he brought with him more than just the knowledge to save his own world. He carried Solara's legacy with him, a reminder that humanity's survival was tied to how they treated the worlds they encountered. Her sacrifice wasn't just about saving one planet. It was about teaching humanity to respect the delicate balance of life, to collaborate rather than conquer, to heal rather than harm. As he looked toward the future, Marcus knew that Solara's legacy would live on, not just in the planet she had saved, but in the lessons humanity would carry forward. Her story, her sacrifice, would be a beacon of hope and redemption for both their worlds. The planet would thrive once more, and with it, perhaps, so would humanity.